Hello, fellow creatives. We are deep into how to do pre-production on your film, and today we are digging right into the scheduling. And this is great because it sort of piggybacks off a previous episode we did on how to actually plot out the story of your film.
Yeah, that's right. So in that episode we talked about index cards and using them as a way to sort of chunk out your story, figure out where the resources are going to go in terms of locations that you're going to visit, participants or talent you're going to be working with. Roughly how much screen time you're looking to capture in those sequences and where in the world they are located. And all of these things are really important to scheduling.
Yeah, absolutely, particularly if your scheduling involves you going interstate or overseas, because you have to be really well planned out to make sure that you're going to capture everything that you need on that trip.
Yeah, I've been thinking a bit about scheduling, and I feel like a big part of it is actually saying to you guys, maybe don't condense it too much. So sometimes there's really good economic reasons for bundling things together, but I think when you sort of crush a whole documentary schedule into the tightest amount of time, there's a big downside. So this is probably worth mentioning now. I think documentaries really benefit from scheduled breaks so that you can really look at the materials that you've captured and figure out if they're working the way you hope that they were going to work on screen, or if they need pickups to really make them work better, or perhaps you're going to go in a slightly different direction. But when it's a really compressed schedule, you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, particularly if you're going from city and flying to another city, you know, you might only allow a day to film with one particular story, and then you really don't have any time to do any pickups if you need anything else or overlay footage. And when you jam too much in, it can really actually hinder the filmmaking process. So, you know, a longer schedule might be a luxury because of the budget constraints, but anywhere that you can give yourself a little bit more time to have it all breathe and have more time with each story is going to help you.
So when we think about the schedule, what are we looking for? What does it actually look like on the sheet? Is it starting from this date in pre-production going right through to the end of the film?
I wish it would work that way because that's, you know, really organised and would be so fabulous, but it usually doesn't. It's usually a lot more piecemeal. So you might sort of go, okay, so we kind of know that we have to be here and do this in the first week of March, and then we'll try and do this here in the second week of April. And so you might, depending on your production schedule, it might be over a 6-month period, and you kind of have blocks where you might know that you're going to go and film and do certain things. And then, so you're looking at really big picture, and then you're trying to chunk it down into what you need within each of those blocks.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think kind of having windows of times or blocks is really helpful. So you might say, I know that my documentary film is going to take, 6 weeks of production, but that 6 weeks of production might happen over a, 3 or 4 month period.
Or even a couple of years.
It could be, depending on the story. It could be like that. And then you might also be turning your mind to some post-production elements, how long the edit's going to go for. You might say, I'm doing a 16-week edit on this. And then you sort of think about another chunk, which might be the sound edit and design. The composing the composer, if you're doing an original soundtrack, is going to need time to do that work and record with the musicians, so you're taking all of these elements and sort of mapping them out.
Yep.
So it looks less like a date list than a calendar with big blocks in it.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting thing that you bring up there about those blocks, because often in documentary, particularly the way we put ours together, is our editor might do a 6-week block on post-production while we're still in production, and then from that sort of assembly edit we can go, oh, we're missing this, and wouldn't it be great if we had that? So it's not a linear process, documentary. It can move around, and it also depends on people's availability. So, you might have the dream editor for your project, but they've only got 4 weeks here and then 4 weeks over there, and that might inform your production schedule as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that's really important to just break out of that linear way of thinking about it and think about overlapping windows is completely fine. But you also now need to allow people enough time to do their jobs really well.
Yeah.
So that's another part of it. So you're going to need as much production as is required to make a brilliant film to the screen time length that you have decided your film's going to be. You need to give your composer enough time to do a terrific job to make that volume of music etc.
Yeah, so it is quite a lot to it, to the mapping out. And the only thing I can suggest is really just be really open to being fluid about it. Don't get too rigid about this has to happen there and this has to happen then. You've got to have some big milestones, but you've also got to be quite flexible in how you approach it.
And talk to your collaborators. You know, how long do you think this would take, you know, to your director of photography? How much time would you need to do that, composer? You know, and talk to everyone and consult on it, you know, to come up with a realistic plan with buffer in there. I think buffer's really important, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so, and the key thing with all of this is don't let anything become a roadblock and a stopping force. You know, if something doesn't go to plan or you're not quite sure how to find your way through, keep going with a different area. Don't stop everything because one thing's not going to work out or your editor pulls out or your cinematographer's not available at this time or whatever it is. There's so many different other things that you can dive into and keep things moving along, and that's where being fluid and being willing to be flexible and fluid is really important with scheduling.
All right, so Sue, let's step this out for these guys because that might be really helpful. So we're looking at a blank sheet. We've talked about the calendar view and windows of time, blocks of time, rather than like a date list. You know, let's break it down. Where do we start?
I would start with the milestones. So you would say, for example, you need to film X amount of stories by this time and you need to start post-production by this time and your composer's available to start at this time. So you've got those really big milestones mapped out. That would be the first thing that I would do.
I completely agree. I think reverse engineering this problem is the best way to do it. You might have a film festival in your mind about where you want it to premiere, or you might have a day and date that you know it's got to be on this day, you know, in a year's time or whatever.
Your investor, be it a broadcaster, has said this is delivery date.
So I'm actually working back now from the, you know, red carpet premiere to delivering the DCP or whatever you're going to be screening off, because that's a mastering process, you know, and then I'm going to step back from that and saying, well, I need to do the layback with all of the final audio in the film against the final pictures. I'm going to step back from that and say, okay, I need to allow time for those audio post-production processes, for the audio mix and sweetening, for the audio edit, for the original music if it's getting composed. Often overlapping with those chunks you have the colour grading happening, and then before that all of the post-production on the edit, on the picture editing, happens before that, and often that happens in a bigger block of time. And then, you know, we slowly work our way back into production. But when you get to production, what are you trying to achieve in terms of scheduling that out? Are you looking to condense it into one big block of time, or, you know, how do you go about it?
No, I think for documentary, trying to do everything in one block of time. I mean, feature films obviously film, you know, in a linear way across 6 weeks and it's all mapped out differently. Documentaries don't work like that because it's very much dependent on when the subject matter you're filming is available and where they're located and how you're going to get from A to B and who's available, when's your DOP available, when's your, you know, when's your participant available. You have to consider all of those things. And so you might have 2 weeks of production here, 3 weeks later you might have another week of production here. And you're looking at if you need to travel and also how that travel is going to be impacted by people's availability. So you're really looking at the sort of holistic overview of all the things that you need to film and how you can piece them into the schedule in the time that you have.
I think you need to be a bit flexible too. Like I remember making Conquering Cancer with you during the pandemic, you know, and it was such a disrupted schedule, you know, things had to move all the time because cities were going into lockdown or you couldn't access this place or someone got sick. So you need to be quite flexible in your thinking and just know that you've got this amount of production to happen within this amount of time, you know, so you might say I've got 6 weeks of production to happen within a 4-month window, you know, and then you're going to move the pieces around and you sometimes need to be quite flexible with that as well.
You do, and sometimes you need to go back and film more than you thought you did because on the day you couldn't get beyond the interview to do any of the overlay, and so you need to be able to go back and do that overlay. So that's where a lot of that contingency and flexibility comes in because things come up. I mean, it's documentary, it's, you know, it's actuality, it's, you know, you can't plan everything. So you have to be fluid and you have to be able to have time and buffer in your schedule to allow for those kinds of things.
Now, I just want to touch on animation really quickly because I think things like creating original music for your film can really only be done after picture lock when you've edited the pictures for your movie. So it kind of has to go in a bit of a linear process there. But with animation, I don't think you want to leave that to post-production. You want to schedule it as part of your production period because it can take quite a lot of time and quite a lot of reviews to get what you want. So treat it as if it is production and schedule it accordingly at that part of the process.
Yeah, so I think what we're really saying here is in pre-production, you're not just planning out production, you're planning out production, post-production and delivery. It's everything.
And
all
working
the
back.
components.
And working back from the end date, yeah.
Yeah. So starting at the end, working backwards and seeing what needs to go where. And then once you sort of have that broad overview on a calendar, that's going to really help you to figure out all that more micro detail of what you're trying to achieve.
So go forth and schedule. Good luck, guys. Start from the end and work back from there and let us know how you go. Subscribe and stay tuned to the rest of the series about how to make your documentary.